What? No, you've got to accept this.
Hang on. No, I'm going to accept it. To go south. Wait. Israel does have the ability to kill everyone in Gaza tomorrow, and they're not doing it.
In any kind of peace is impossible because neither side voting that's very, very worrying.
Socialist commentator Owen Jones. Owen, you've been sitting there patiently. Your response to Mark Regev there?
A grotesque inversion of reality. I mean, the thing about Israeli spokesperson like that is if I was told the sky was blue, I'd go out the window and check just to be sure.
What did he say that's wrong?
For one thing, talking about the hospital being used as a terror base. Now, let's just bear in mind that Israel's spokespeople have a long track record of lying through the back teeth. When they shot in the head, for example, Shireen Abu Akleh, they said for months and months and months it was Palestinian gunmen. It wasn't. They shot her in the head. James Miller, a brilliant British documentary filmmaker, shot years later, of course.
You wouldn't believe Hamas and their version of events either, would you?
Well, that's why I'd bet.
I agree with what Owen's saying. It's all true. But I would say just generally, don't trust 100% of everything coming out of both sides. It could be true, it could not be true.
Depend on what aid agencies the United Nations are saying on the ground, which is that collective punishment is being unleashed against the Palestinian people. I mean, look, we can see already the evidence they've been unveiling for what they said was a terror hub, including showing CDs and a computer. What they've done to that hospital is, firstly, because they cut off energy in a total siege, which they justified by saying they were fighting human animals, which should be considered genocidal retail, has been condemned as such.
Well, it should certainly be condemned, and they should not have the ability, Israel, to cut off water and power and fuel.
That is collective punishment. Can we agree? Under Article 33, that's against the law. It's a war crime. Can we agree? I think we should have some consensus.
This is my issue in this whole conflict. Israel had a legitimate reason to be attacking Hamas, but the stuff that they're doing and the rhetoric coming out of the Israeli government, especially when you look into the history of people like Netanyahu, is just completely unacceptable. Right? There's too many people dead. And if what they're saying about what's in Al-Shifa is true, it looks pretty minor. And it comes down to, if there's like a small base, it depends what they're doing out of there. Maybe more evidence will come out. Maybe it'll turn out it's a huge base of operations. But even if there's like a small base under a hospital, it probably isn't worth raiding it because of the loss of life. And even if you just wanted from a pro-Israeli perspective, it makes Israel look terrible. And it's just, unless you find a massive command and control centre under there, it seems not about causing as much damage as possible, because Israel could do way more damage, but just really not caring how much damage you can do.
I would argue you're heading towards collective punishment when you do that.
You're not heading towards collective punishment when you cut off energy or water to the entire civilian population.
Except, to play devil's advocate, to try and get fuel in, the Israelis, as they've said, to the hospitals, to the humanitarian side of this. But they know that Hamas are taking that fuel and using it for their military.
The hospital authorities, who we should listen to, have rebutted those accusations. Look, what's happened here is babies right now are gasping for breath and suffocating. We've had several nurses and patients shot dead. In fact, this whole hospital has been described by medical staff as a mortuary.
But you don't know.
When a hospital becomes a mass grave, when dozens of decomposing bodies have to be buried in a mass grave in a hospital, we're talking what you said. Can I just quote something you said about Putin? And I think this was very wise. You said, in March 2022, I'm seeing a genocidal monster killing women and babies in maternity hospitals as we sit back and let him do it. Why was it so disgraceful? But you were right. You were right to be emotional.
Here's the difference.
Why when you see this hospital, is there not the same fury?
Let me explain. Because the two are, in my opinion, morally very different. In one case, Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, he was committing war crimes, having illegally invaded wait a second, let me finish. Having invaded a sovereign democratic country. Here, it was Israel that was invaded by a vast number of terrorists who murdered over 1,500 innocent men, women, children. They kidnapped 240 people, including babies, children, Holocaust survivors. So my point is, morally, there is a massive difference.
Hold on.
Morally, it's a massive difference. Now, the question of the hospital, wait a sec. The question of the hospitals is this to me. They have so far produced some evidence of Hamas operating inside the hospital. For me, so far, as a journalist trying to be fair and impartial, I don't think, as you've heard me say to Mark Regev, I don't think I've seen enough evidence here which says to me this was a sprawling command centre. But there is a moral difference between what Putin's doing in Ukraine and what Israel's doing to defend itself against Hamas, isn't there?
Hold on.
Isn't there?
No, no, sorry, this is the difference, OK, if you want to talk about that or trying to separate them. For a Ukrainian ordinary civilian being killed or for an ordinary Palestinian child being killed,
both equally awful.
None of them did anything wrong. We agree on that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We absolutely agree on that.
Do.
Now, when you repeatedly denounced Putin...
But there is a moral difference between what...
Sorry, I need to go back. I got distracted by the Twitter stream not working.
Wait a sec. The question of the hospitals is this to me. They have so far produced some evidence of Hamas operating inside the hospital. For me, so far, as a journalist trying to be fair and impartial, I don't think, as you've heard me say to Mark Regev, I don't think I've seen enough evidence here which says to me this was a sprawling command centre. But there is a moral difference between what Putin's doing in Ukraine and what Israel's doing to defend itself against Hamas, isn't there?
Hold on.
Isn't there?
No, absolutely. No, sorry, this is the difference, OK, if you want to talk about that or trying to separate them.
No, I'm sorry. I think that it does lead to a difference. It doesn't necessarily justify invading a hospital to deal with a very small base. However, right, there was a massive, insane, brutal massacre in Israel that I think Israel... I just think anybody would respond to militarily. Now, I don't think anybody would cause 10,000... that just anybody would cause 10,000 deaths. Putin also would. To be fair, I don't think in either case it's a genocide. I think Putin wanted to do cultural genocide in Ukraine, in the sense if he wanted to erase the culture and make it Russian. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, certainly people like Ben Gvir, who Netanyahu's in government with, would love to do genocide on Palestinians. But I don't think in either case it's a genocide. In Ukraine, it's a brutal imperialist war. And in... I don't even know what you call it in Israel, with the Israeli-Palestinian situation, because it's like the levels of violence coming currently out of Hamas and the desire for violence from both Hamas and the Netanyahu government basically mean any kind of peace is impossible because neither side wants it. Both sides revel in and somewhat depend on violence. The situation there is different. It's very complicated. I think both sides in the recent conflict have done some pretty horrendous stuff. Obviously, Israel's got way more power, so its body count's much higher. And I don't want to get into a debate about whether it's less brutal to bomb people than it is to chop them up. So as some people have been doing. So yeah, I think the situation's clearly very, very different because the Russia-Ukraine one is much more uncomplicated.
For a Ukrainian ordinary civilian being killed or for an ordinary Palestinian child being killed,
both equally awful.
None of them did anything wrong. We agree on that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We absolutely agree on that.
Do.
Now, when you repeatedly denounced Putin for his genocidal behaviour in Ukraine, do you stand by that? Do you think that's a genocide?
Absolutely.
Well, it doesn't matter what the basis for what the operation...
Of course it does.
No.
It does.
No, Piers, in terms of what actually is happening, we can talk about the massacre, the obscene massacre of 1,000...
What Israel's doing is not genocide.
Piers.
You can't keep saying
let's talk about...
10,000 dead out of 2 million is tragic. It's awful. But it's not... It's a tiny fraction of the population of Gaza. It's awful, right? And it's a lot of people. Right? It's too heavy-handed, and I condemn the tactics. However, as I say, it just isn't genocide. And this obsession that some people have, where something bad happens, and we have to call it something else that's bad, is just unhelpful. Right? It doesn't do anything. It doesn't save any lives. Genocide should be when you're deliberately trying to eradicate a people, not when you've done heavy-handed bombings, not when you invaded a country, not even when you have some people in the government who make insane genocidal statements. Unless you're actively trying to do it, it's not really a genocide.
Genocide. Let's talk about genocide.
Yeah.
Why is it?
Let me tell you the difference between genocide. Let me put something to you, and you come back at me and tell me if I'm wrong. Hamas, from its charter onwards, and from the spokesman said last week, is dedicated to the eradication of Israel and killing as many Jews as it can possibly kill. That is the purest definition of genocide intent that you will ever see. And they executed it on October the 7th as best they could. Now, what Israel's doing in response, and they've been very firm about this, and the international...
Well, yeah, again, you could say, I don't... Hamas, it's in their charter that they should genocide all the Jews in Israel. However, they didn't have anything like the ability to... What happened on October the 7th was horrific. Like, real horrendous stuff. But, again, that's not genocide. Not because Hamas don't want to do genocide, but because they can't, and that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to do a brutal attack. Because they know they don't have the power to wipe out all the Jews in Israel, so they just killed as many as they can, which is a massacre. But again, it's not genocide even then. Even though, yes, Hamas would love genocide. But again, as I say, I'm pretty sure Ben Gvir and people would love genocide, but it doesn't mean Israel's doing a genocide.
Courts will rule as they...
Piers, these are very long questions.
They're not. I'm answering a point, and I'm putting one to you, right? In my estimation, they are qualitatively different. What Hamas is
Can I answer?
Publicly what it's doing is genocide. What Israel's doing is not genocide.
There's a difference between what Israel, you could say both Israel and Hamas have engaged in genocidal and murderous rhetoric.
No.
And I'll give you an example.
No,
yes,
no,
they have.
no, you can't.
Benjamin Netanyahu.
No,
I can. Is it uncensored or not?
Yes. You can say
Let me quote what the Israeli authorities have said.
Go on.
Benjamin Netanyahu, when he quoted Amalek, the scriptures, what does Amalek say? He quotes Amalek when they attacked the Israelites. And what God told the Israelites to do was to kill every man, woman, child, and livestock. If I would put it to you...
Yeah, it's actually, with the Amalekites, it says that they were so evil that God didn't just say you have to kill all of them. He said you have to kill all of them and kill all of the animals that they own and burn down all of the crops and smash the houses to pieces. Which is, pretty insane. So to be honest, if you're quoting that, that's very, very worrying. Right? Now, are they trying to do that? No. But I mean, like Netanyahu and the others probably would if they could get away with it, but they can't.
Islamist leader was quoting a similarly genocidal passage from the Quran. You would not, I would say,
Can I respond?
Hesitate.
Can I respond?
We haven't. Just no. But you've had a lot.
Respond to that
I'm going
point.
to respond just quickly. Israeli officials said that Gaza will end up being a city of tents with no building standing. That they are attacking for damage, not for accuracy. The agricultural minister Avi Dikti, he said we are rolling out a new Nakba. A Nakba is the mass expulsion, 700,000 Palestinians in 1948. This is why hundreds of genocide scholars, people who are actually, unlike you and I, experts in the field of genocide studies, fear that a genocide is taking place. So the difference between Israel and Hamas is Hamas does not have the capacity to wipe out Israel. Israel is wiping Gaza off the map.
Well, no. If the Israelis actually wanted to do genocide, they would. It's difficult to say actually want, because again, there are people in government who would love to. But if they're actually doing genocide, the death toll will be higher than 10,000. I'm not minimising 10,000 dead, but it will be a hell of a lot higher. It'll be a hell of a lot higher. So saying that this rhetoric is worrying, could this lead to genocide? Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair thing to say. Saying, is what's going on now genocide? No, it clearly isn't. And the problem is, we end up in this ridiculous argument over, is this genocide, when what we should be doing is arguing, about how do we solve this problem? How do we get peace to the region? How do we get an equitable solution for Israelis and Palestinians? Right? How do we have peace? How do we have an end to the killing?
But that's the point.
But no.
Not
you
which
actually
words to use.
expose the weakness in your argument. Israel does have the ability to kill everyone in Gaza tomorrow, and they're not doing it. In fact, well, hang on. What they're doing, and it's indisputable, they are issuing a number of warnings repeatedly to people to go south. Wait! And stay out of northern Gaza, right? And then they're pulverising it with airstrikes, and now they've gone in on the ground, and they're waging battle with Hamas fighters, terrorists, right? No, hang on. So my point is this. Israel could, if they wanted to, kill everyone in Gaza. They decided not to do that.
Is your definition...
genocide is where you want to kill everyone. Sorry.
Your definition of genocide... Because in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin hasn't killed every last Ukrainian. That's simply not happened. No, he hasn't.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I don't think it's a genocide there. I think we want to say he'd like to do cultural genocide. Okay? Sure. Fine. Okay. Because cultural genocide is, it's not you kill all the people. It's just you try and destroy the culture and replace it with your own or whatever. So if you wanted to say that, okay, Okay, I think that is partially his goal, although I'm not even sure he really thinks he can achieve that. In the case of, right, but still, if you want to say it's a genocide, like he's trying to eradicate Ukrainians, like kill all of them, I don't think he is. I think they've done massacres. I think it's an insane, horrific brutality. But I wouldn't call either genocide, because I think genocide should have the strict definition if you're trying to eradicate, an entire group of people.
Nor has he stated his intention to do so, and nor as brutal and barbaric.
Actually, sorry,
to be
Vladimir Putin,
to be clear,
absolutely, by illegally invading a sovereign country and indiscriminately bombing anything in front of him.
Indiscriminately bombing.
Is waging a form of genocide.
Wow. Indiscriminate bombing. Gaza. More than 2 Hiroshima bombs worth have been dropped on East London in the space of 5 weeks.
Okay, let me ask you two questions.
No, you said Ukraine. No, I'm going to have to put this to you.
Okay.
15,000 people have now been killed now by the Israelis, estimate, in Gaza. 1 in every 200 people in Gaza have now been killed. If you were to adjust for population in Ukraine, that would be 300,000 Ukrainian civilians. 300,000, there's been a terrible death toll. It's estimated by the UN 10,000 civilians have been killed since February last year. In the space of 5 weeks, a country with a much, much smaller population has had a much higher, has had a death toll higher officially than that in Ukraine. So how can it be?
I'm going to answer.
How can it be that you call that genocide, but when you have nearly half the entire civilian death toll of the Bosnian War in a country which is twice the size in terms of population, why isn't that genocide, Piers?
Well, I've just answered your question by saying if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they would simply
So would Russia.
They would vaporize.
So would Russia. They would nuke Ukraine.
Russia wants to take over
Ukraine. I don't like. That's a silly argument. Oh, well, he'd use nukes. It's like, well, I don't think he would. I think he would if he could. To be fair, I think he'd use tactical nukes to scare everybody if he could, but it would start a war, and so he can't.
Ukraine.
Yes, and they want to take over Gaza.
And it will kill any number of Ukrainians, men, women and children, in that process.
The death rate,
death
rate in Gaza is much higher.
The only reason it hasn't is that actually Ukraine has a large military supported by countries like the United States and is putting up one hell of a fight.
Russia has nuclear weapons.
Okay. And by the way, Ukraine gave theirs up.
Russia has an armed force.
Let me ask you.
What? No, you've got to accept this.
Hang on. No. A
far lower death rate in Ukraine.
I've explained why. I've explained why.
You haven't explained why.
Yes, I have. Well, let me explain
Israel
again.
have made it clear.
You didn't hear me.
Israel have made it clear that they intend to occupy Gaza permanently.
Yeah, which they should not be allowed to do.
And what did
we can agree on that.
What did the Israeli ministry leaked intelligence? What did the intelligence?
Yeah, if they occupy indefinitely, though, it's still not a genocide. This is why I think you need a strict definition of genocide, and not just try and call anything bad. There's a lot of loss of life. Genocide. Genocide is when you're trying to eradicate a group of people, right? Something can be really bad and not be genocide. Right? If somebody just beat you up in the street for no reason, that's really bad. But then if you're like, oh, I was raped, like he was touching me without my consent and hit me, and also it's well, it's not rape. It's different. It's terrible. It's really awful, but it's not on that level. That's something different. And I think we need to be careful of just. It's not even just using words like that. It's obsessing over them. Obsessing, is it genocide? It doesn't matter. Let's talk about how we find a way out of the current problem. It seems to be very difficult with either of the current leaderships, right? I mean, there's no way you can have peace with Hamas because they view any negotiation, any recognition of Israel as an absolute betrayal of the Palestinians. They'll never give in to that. Netanyahu is basically a fascist who wants to take over the whole area. He's seemingly happy to let Ben Gvir and people just erase the power of the Supreme Court. So both sides want violence, both sides profit from violence. In terms of the governments, the people of both sides, of course, lose. The people of both sides are the losers. But the governments win. And, as long as that goes on, it's very difficult to see an end in sight because you're going to have Israelis voting for increasingly far-right governments. There's going to be more violence. Gaza's growing up being bombed. They're going to join Hamas. They're going to do terrorism. There's going to be even more far-right governments doing even worse stuff. And it seems like we're in an endless cycle of violence. And I think working a way out of that is what's important, rather than sitting around going, no, it's genocide. You have to say it's genocide. Oh, no, you mustn't say it's genocide. It's just a silly discussion.
Sorry, mate, it's my interview of you.
I know, but
not your interview of me.
Well, I think you need to be held to account on that.
Let me answer you. Well, let me ask you two questions, which I asked Jeremy Corbyn.
Sure.
Let's get these off the table. Do you believe Hamas is a terror group?
Yes, if you engage in violence against civilian population, that's terrorism.
Okay, wait, don't do supplementaries. Let me just ask you this. Second question, which I asked him and she couldn't answer. Should Hamas remain in power?
If I could wave a magic wand, then no, obviously there'd be an independent, let me finish.
Okay.
There'd be an independent Palestine, free of Israeli rule, with a secular democratic movement in power. The difference
I agree with you.
When you courageously stood against the Iraq war, and you were courageous for doing so, what was the argument put against you? That you wanted to keep Saddam Hussein in power even though he gassed his own people, the Kurds, and committed genocide, many would argue, that he had invaded his neighbour.
And that was genocide, he was trying to wipe them out.
He had massacred the Shia when they rose up in 1991. Now, your argument against that was that what could happen next would be far, far worse. And you were right.
That wasn't my argument.
Well, that is the argument.
No.
Did you want to keep Saddam Hussein in power?
Don't tell me what my argument was. I know what it was. I was editor of the paper that waged the campaign.
Did you want Saddam Hussein to remain in power?
I did not believe that they had produced any evidence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. I thought he had nothing to do with 9/11. Therefore, we were waging a completely irrelevant war, which I thought would stir up absolute hell in the Middle East. And you know what? I was right.
Yeah.
And actually, most of the architects of that war now concede they were wrong.
Yeah, they were.
It was a horror story from start to finish. But what it did do is spark the rise of ISIS. And what the world did with ISIS was say, this crosses a moral line, we have to get rid of them. And we went after ISIS in places like Iraq and Syria and other countries. And in bombing the hell out of ISIS, a lot of civilians got killed.
You just skipped a lot of very important history.
Wait a minute.
No, that's not what happened.
Well, that is what happened.
No, that's not what happened.
One of the consequences of the Iraq war was that ISIS became a very powerful, for a short period.
Well, to be fair, they've got like a 15-minute segment. Like, I don't really... Wait, hold on. You didn't do the entire history from 2005 onwards. That takes more. That takes more than the last 4 minutes of a 15-minute segment. I'm sorry. To be fair to Piers Morgan.
At a time, global terror force committing atrocity.
Piers, can I just correct your version of history?
But in wiping out ISIS pretty effectively, we also killed a lot of civilians.
No, what actually happened?
What's the moral difference between that and what Israel's doing in Gaza?
You just revised history. We were told that Al-Qaeda was perhaps in league with Saddam Hussein. That was one of the justifications for invading. What actually happened after the invasion was that it became a playground for Al-Qaeda, who you've missed out, I've noticed.
No.
And what happened...
We know about Al-Qaeda. I'm talking about ISIS.
What happened, for example, is Fallujah, the city of Fallujah in Iraq, the Americans went in and they massacred people protesting against their rule, and many of those Sunni populations ended up driven into the arms of Al-Qaeda. A brutal counterinsurgency program then resulting in mass slaughter of innocent Sunni civilians, and from that fury and anger, something even worse than Al-Qaeda emerged. Just as...
ISIS.
Yes.
So you agree with
that was... No, I'm saying that's exactly what we're seeing today.
I didn't give every detail of the journey.
No.
I just said, out of the Iraq
war... You've misunderstood.
Right.
They engaged in a brutal counterinsurgency
I know the story.
Offensive against Al-Qaeda, and that caused something worse to emerge. Just as in Afghanistan...
I know.
Just as Afghanistan, we had 2 decades of occupation.
Listen, we're running out of time.
2 decades of occupation, and the Taliban emerged stronger than ever. The same applies to both what happened in Iraq.
That was because, to be fair, that was because of a series of failures in Afghanistan, where we allowed rampant corruption, we allowed Hamid Karzai to rig an election, and then basically his successors to do so. Was he the president the whole time or someone else? No, I think someone else was towards the end. Anyway, with the level of corruption, when I say corruption as well, the level of corruption of the police was insane. They would go to villages where, you have big families and the head of the family is basically makes all the money for the entire family. And they would take him and arrest him and go, he's arrested on terrorism charges. You can either pay bail or he's in prison for the rest of his life. I bribe them. And it even got to the stage where people said, the police won't actually take your case unless you bribe them. You actually have to bribe the police to pay any attention to your problems. Like, it was insane. And that was one of the reasons that people went back to the Taliban. We also took our eye off the ball with Iraq. So, yeah.
And Afghanistan.
It seems to me...
Because if you brutalise a population,
stop talking, Owen.
You will turn them into terrorists.
Stop talking.
Or extremists. Drive them to their arms.
You make a lot of good points. I agree with a lot of things you say, right? Always have done, actually. I find the way you say them, as you do with me, quite annoying. But that's fine. You're allowed to, and we're uncensored. Come back. I want to end, if I can, with some kind of... Look, we've agreed Hamas is a terror group. We've agreed they have to go. How do we actually get peace here?
Well, firstly, we have to deal with the underlying causes of what's driven the Palestinian people, in the case of Gaza, into the hands of Hamas, which is, starting in 1948, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian population in the Nakba, with 700,000 driven from their homes, murderously, I might add. Then...
And hundreds of thousands of Jews were driven from their homes before
not
that.
in Palestine.
Well, they were driven away from Arab countries.
Hold on.
They were driven away from Arab countries.
Yeah, from Palestine.
Jonathan Friedland wrote a very good piece about this, saying, you know what, if you go into history, there's just cause on both sides.
The Palestinians were driven from their homes, 700,000. And then we had the illegal settlements and colonisation, including in the West Bank, were completely unremarked upon.
And I've already condemned
there was mass terror,
settlements of
illegal settlements, and as well as Amnesty International, as Human Rights Watch and B'Tselem describe it, the Israeli Human Rights Organisation, a system of apartheid.
But
if you keep brutalising the Palestinian people, ridding them of their freedom, and you end up now in Gaza with parents picking up the burned, dismembered remnants of their children,
Owen,
there will never be peace.
I agree. What I would say to that is that on the Arab side, they have had multiple opportunities to do a peace deal, not least in 2000 with Arafat, and he walked away.
No, what happened there? Go on. What were the concessions?
Well,
because
the truth is, Bill Clinton, who helped forge peace in Northern Ireland brilliantly with Tony Blair and with the others involved there, that actually Arafat, they had peace in their grasp, and as Bill Clinton said to him, I'm going to end up being a failure because of you.
And that revision of history again, not just from you on this program, but by Bill Clinton, because they demanded, for example, land swaps for a ratio 9 to 1 in favour of Israel.
Come back again.
I'd love to.
No, seriously, this conflict's not going away.
No,
it's
not.
going to continue raging the war. I think you're an important voice in this.
Okay, we'll chat.
Good to see you.
See ya.